went to the keyboard.
Okay.
I think Zoom
I know
crashed.
that Zoom also uses servers.
Okay, so Klaus, you're back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, you want to reshare and pick up where we left off?
Oh, I have to. Okay, yeah, sure. The sharing has also stopped. I didn't realize.
There we go. Okay, we can see it now.
Okay, so I hope that part about ID was still audible.
I didn't hear that. Did anybody else?
Okay, so let's start again with identifying a service. There have been a lot of discussions around this, and so far we have this ID of a service that is required to be a UUID, and it's assigned by the discovery endpoint when this service is created on that endpoint. In addition, there is the name, and here already it's supposed to be human readable and unique just inside that discovery endpoint. I suppose this notion of ID and name is quite similar to what you have in Kubernetes, for example. So maybe that was the motivation here. And in addition, there's also maybe to have it a bit more REST style, this URL. And so this is supposed to be an absolute URL and really point to or be an address where you can then retrieve the details of that service. And I think it would also contain the ID. So, and the last one is not exactly an identifier, but the epoch is quite important for replication scenarios. So each time the service data is updated, this epoch is supposed to be increased. And it also plays a role in the management API. Am I still audible? I hope.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, okay, great. Was just okay. So the API that works on this, first of all, there's the discovery API, so GET operations. So far, it's also quite straightforward and simple. I would say you can list all services. You can retrieve a specific service by ID and by name. So far, I think it's just exact match. There is also an issue that requests adding also partial name matching, but of course that's not that simple if you start this whole idea of querying and maybe wildcards and so on. But yeah, so that's basically what you can do so far to retrieve data around services. First, again, as we had more resources, of course, those operations were also a bit more complex. You couldn't just list services, but also event types. For event types, it's a bit strange because they are not really a resource on their own. We have this field to identify an event type, but apart from that, we don't really. It's not really a resource on its own. It's just a name of or a marker for an event, I would say. So the management API that is optional to support has different operations, and so the first one is without the import parameter is just for the creation and update of a service on the discovery endpoint, and here the endpoint itself creates that ID that was mentioned before. And as in contrast to this, if you use the import variant, then you can provide also an epoch value and an ID, and it's taken into account. So this is then meant also for replication scenarios where one server would replicate its data to another one. But yeah, I find it still somehow confusing also the use of epoch here. And for put with import, I wonder if that really is in the sense of what the semantics, according to the semantics, a put operation should have. As I read, it's supposed to be idempotent. And right now, if you would repeat a put, each time the epoch would be increased. So I'm not sure that's really a clean put. And then according to the principles. But that's just a side note. Yeah, of course, the service can also be deleted, so there's a delete operation. So status and maybe discussion topics, additional ones. So here I just put a link to a query around all the open issues. I think I saw 23 open issues so far that match somehow discovery. My impression is that we should also look a bit more into scenarios. So how exactly is this supposed to be used? Of course, it's nice to have a simple and general specification that just looks at two ends, so a consuming side of the discovery service and the discovery endpoint. But if we want to have a better idea what exactly the problems are we want to solve, we might also have a look at scenarios with, I don't know, centralized infrastructures, intermediaries, or just point-to-point. Those differences that occur in those scenarios might be interesting to have a look at. One thing that I think also some of there might also be an issue about is this source template attribute that defines a template attribute for source, similar to what you know from OpenAPI, for example. It's also referencing the URI template, this RFC for those. This idea could, of course, also be extended to other attributes to really document or define a bit more how certain attributes would be used for certain events. Something I just remember that I also wonder about sometimes is that some attributes are actually not used specific to a certain event type, but more by the infrastructure, if you think of extensions like the partition key and so on. So I wonder if those attributes, the usage of those context attributes could also be somehow documented somewhere. Okay, usability. Yeah, how exactly is discovery supposed to be used, and then what would be required? So also pointing at this idea of source template, if that would play some role in some scenarios again. And yeah, Ahmed already asked about it, and I also think that in the future we at least have to discuss about the relation to other standards like OpenAPI and async API. And because yeah, personally I also get this question about async API quite a bit, as we are also using async API internally. So this is more my personal opinion here, or position. So some brainstorming and food for thought. How in which directions this thing could be extended. So there is this issue Clemens created a few weeks ago around discovery events. So far we have the discovery API and we have the management API where one side tells another side how what is discoverable, I mean, or what it should return as discovery values, pretty much from what you also know from an API server in Kubernetes. Discovery events now is more like that the producer announces again in form of events what it provides, and also an infrastructure might announce what it provides. And I mean, could be nice to, because we would reuse all the cloud events interop we already have regarding protocol mappings, bindings, and things like this. So I also wonder if we could somehow apply concepts that are already now in place in the schema registry, like the URIs, the schema URIs that are used in there, or this notion of authority, the different replication scenarios mentioned in there. I think some of those concepts could also be used for discovery. I mentioned already protocol bindings. So if you already have a consumer that is, especially in cases where you have a event infrastructure with intermediaries, you already have a consumer that is connected to that infrastructure, and if you then can use the same protocol bindings also to retrieve discovery updates, for example, then that could be nice in addition to just the REST APIs for discovery. And last but not least, so far there's this API resource of a service, and a lot of other standards, like for example OpenAPI or Async API, use the notion of documents. And I wonder also for those discovery events if a document format defining a discovery document could also be a way forward. Documents are very flexible. You can use it in different environments. You can store them in a version source code repository and all those things. So that's why I think maybe a document format for discovery data might also be something to look into in the future. Okay, are there any questions?
Ahmed, you came off mute. Did you have a question? Or maybe you're always off mute. I never noticed.
I actually was typing a question in the chat, but okay.
Go for it.
Where do you see this going with regards to the concept of subscription manager that was defined in the subscription API?
So the service resource has also this subscription URL in here. So that's where it's pointing to the subscription manager, essentially.
Think of it as a layered model. Like you can start the simplest API of all of those to implement is the subscription manager. And so if you already know where that is, you probably don't need to have a, so for discovery, it's fine to have documentation in many cases. And if you look at the reality of how people use webhooks today and those subscription mechanisms, they look at a document and then they go and get a URL and just use it. So, so subscription manager is kind of the most elemental of those APIs, and then discovery layers on top of it, and effectively points to the subscription managers. That's the relationship between them.
Thank you.
So Klaus, one thing that popped in my mind is when you're talking about the the normal API, not the management API, but the other one, we have the get operation, right? You can do get service and you can search by name. And I know at one point we had the ability to search based upon the type of the event. Do you remember why we removed that?
I don't know. Is Scott still online? Because,
no, he's on vacation this week, unfortunately.
Okay. Because I think that was something based on feedback from Scott and the Knative group. I think
maybe because it just seems like such a natural thing to say, hey, who produces this type of event?
Problem is that you then have different. I think it was something like the implementation of this. You would in the end return more or less the same data, just sorted in a different way or formatted in a different way, and they regarded this as a lot of implementation overhead. Something like this.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Klaus? Okay, not hearing any. So I guess the question then for anybody, not just Klaus, but we did this to try to help move the ball forward in terms of figure out the next steps here. Does this help people figure out what's missing, you know, or how to move the ball forward relative to the state of the spec? I mean, obviously, I think this was valuable information, and thank you, Klaus, for doing it. It was very useful, especially for the folks who may not be familiar with this. But I'm trying to figure out how we then use this to say, okay, here are the gaps in the spec, or here's where we need to focus on before we can claim we think we're getting near completion. So, Klaus, as you were doing your review, for example, do you feel like there were areas that popped out at you that we need to address Because I think you might have touched on some areas that you want to have more discussions on, but I wasn't sure if that was your complete list of holes in the spec.
Well, I wanted to first give a more or less neutral overview most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I try to keep that out of here a bit. Just the last slide about brainstorming was, of course, a bit more of my ideas. Yeah, one thing I see here is really this service metadata, subscription information, and events in a single resource that makes me wonder how that would work in our scenarios, as we have this replication to different endpoints, and so where the subscription URL would have to be mixed in by the infrastructure, and then that, of course, would, according to the spec right now, be a modification to the service. And yeah, so and also the ID that it's a UUID, I wonder if that's really something to stick to, or if some URI would be more suitable. Those are things I'm looking at.
So I want to make sure I understood the first one. Are you suggesting that maybe you should be able to update the subscription portion of the service without necessarily updating the epoch?
Yeah, so if you have something like an event broker, it's also a bit odd. You might have a lot of services with a lot of events, and the subscription information most of this would be the same for all of them, because you would use your central event broker infrastructure. And in that case, this model is a bit strange. So that's also what I stumbled upon when I first tried to start implementation of this.
So that's almost sounds like a different topic, though, than what you brought up a second ago. So are you saying that it's weird in the case where the subscription URL is the same for all services? Are you saying that it's weird to have to replicate it here, or are you worried that that's going to force people to implement it to duplicate information? Because I always viewed this as a view on the infrastructure, and whether the infrastructure actually duplicates this information for every single service, or it's only stored once and they just expose it under every single service is a different topic to me. So I'm trying to figure out, are you worried about an implementation choice here, or are you worried that we're just too verbose in cases where it's the same for everybody?
So it's a mix, I would say. So it's quite verbose, and I don't know if you want to make a single subscription, but for events from multiple services, then it's also good to know that they all can be retrieved from the same subscription endpoint, or subscribed to by using the same subscription endpoint. What you have to do here is you have to collect all them and build up something like a hash table according to the subscription URL or something like this to realize if they come from the same, are retrievable through the same subscription endpoint.
Got it. Okay, I think I see.
And the other thing is the epoch question, and if that's then also influenced by those things, because this information comes from a different source, essentially.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool if you opened up an issue, or even obviously a PR would be nice too. But that's an interesting discussion. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay. Any other questions, comments for Klaus, since we're almost out of time? Eric, you want to say something?
Comment. Yeah, I one of the items on the brainstorming slide was replication. First item, I think. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, sort of. So one of the things that I've had an issue on is that it'd be nice to have a history. And one of the things as I started to look into that, that I thought about was that it really would be useful for there to be a event stream that is, kind of change events of the discovery service as services are managed, that a stream of those management actions would then be available, or a series of events of those management actions would be available, and that would be a good way for replication to flow using the existing kind of cloud events transport mechanisms. are you thinking about the something that's broader than what we do with the schema registry? So do you think we need to have kind of before after?
Let's see. So I guess I was saying that the schema registry, the schemas for these things would be separate. So simply, so the events that I imagine, basically, I would expect the discovery service to itself be a source for events.
Yeah. That's
that those events would be, okay.
So I think that's what Klaus is referring to here.
Yep.
Is
Right.
literally the same, using the same mechanism that we have for the schema registry, but expressed for discovery.
Okay, I don't have that mechanism from the schema registry in my head at the moment, so I'll go take a look at that. I had started working on it and then got caught up in some of the lack of open API definitions and stuff like that. I was trying to do some cleanup. But anyway,
okay,
continue work on that.
All right. So 1 more minute left. Any last questions for Klaus? Okay. In that case, thank you, Klaus, again for presenting. This has been useful. Hopefully other people found it useful, especially the people who are newer to the group. Couple of questions or a couple of things. First, Christian, are you there? I think you're the only person I didn't get for the agenda.
Late.
Yep. Okay, good. Thank you. And Clemens, just a reminder, you're on tap for talking about subscriptions for next week.
Yes,
Just
sir.
to remind you. Okay. All right. Any last topics people want to bring up? Okay. And let me just double check. I don't believe anything's been added to the SDK doc, so we can probably cancel that call, which would start in a minute. Let me just double check. Okay. I don't see anything on the agenda. Does anybody have any topic for the SDK call? Okay. In that case, I believe we're done for the day for both phone calls. All right. Thank you guys for joining. Talk next week.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.